These games took over the world. Millions of players, dominated Twitch, and overnight phenomenons. But what happened? So what went wrong? Was it the players who moved on, the developers who failed them, or was this always inevitable? Well, with that, why don't we dive right into one of the biggest games to ever fail. Among Us is a social game of lies, deception, and betrayal, all based on a game called Mafia, where you have imposters that are trying to kill everyone, and crewmates that have to complete simple various tasks while trying to discover the imposters. Among Us blew up in September of 2020 due to multiple reasons. For one, it was a social game during a time when social interactions were very limited due to a little tiny virus. The game was also heavily influenced by streamers and YouTubers, and even Dream Green Minecraft Blob got in on the action. Among Us became so popular that it had a cultural impact with the word sus and memes. A few other reasons were just its simplicity for anyone to understand and the availability on almost all platforms. But games like this only stay on the top for so long. Among Us thrived because it brought people together in isolation. When the world reopened, the game's simple mechanics weren't enough to keep players hooked, along with small issues that began to arise like server issues, hackers, and the lack of updates due to the small team. Among Us today has since fixed those issues, along with newer features, maps, and even completely new games. Among Us is a fun party game with friends, but you can only play it for so long, and unfortunately, it will probably never recover from the height that it once was. Among Us was a very social game, but what would happen if the game was mainly single player? Palworld is a survival game that has no similarities to Pokemon, and oh yeah, and also this game has guns. Palworld had such a unique twist to a game that has barely changed in over a decade. How could this game not blow up? And it did, in early 2004, with the help of YouTube, Twitch, and the use of vibrant colors in the game to catch the eyes of millions, especially on Steam with a peak player count over 2.1 million concurrent players. Palworld would stay popular for some time but eventually die off due to a lack of things to do in the game, a small team, and bugs, especially with the game still being in early access, even to this day. Today, Palworld still maintains a small but dedicated community of players now that the game has received new updates, but it's still facing some potential legal issues, or shall we say inspiration. Palworld, a game that has a very unique twist, died. But what about a game that's based on something that already exists? Would it die as well? I mean Fall Guys, an online version of Wipeout. You know, like the game with those big, juicy, red balls? But it's a competitive multiplayer game for kids that fight to the death. Anyways, the game would blow up in August of 2020, right after a certain game, due to a lot of similar reasons. Like that small virus again, it's a party game with wide availability, YouTubers, and streamers. Unfortunately, this wouldn't last long, as the game would start to lose popularity due to its simplicity, server issues, and party aspect. And with its popularity, the competitive nature would cause casual players to quit, leaving only the sweats, making the game almost too competitive. Today, Fall Guys has expanded with new maps, cosmetics, and platforms, although this hasn't saved their game, since new competitors like Stumble Guys are even bigger than the original, mostly due to their advantage in the mobile market. Fall Guys is a very competitive game that died, but what about a horror game? Lethal Company is a great company where I love going out and gathering scrap, only to get demolished by whatever that is. 10 out of 10 job. So yeah, Lethal Company is a social horror game where you work for some company to create some really scary and funny moments for your friends, which played a critical point in the game's rise to fame. The unique art style that the game has just made it stand out compared to any other games that I've seen. If you want a more in-depth look, check this video out. What's even more impressive is that this game was developed by one person, which is both impressive but also daunting to keep the game alive. Eventually, the game would fall off like every other game, with a lot of the same issues like limited updates and lack of replayability. But you can't really blame anyone for this, as this was made by one person. Today, the game still has a small but active community of old and new players. Until now, I've only talked about indie games with small teams. But what if the game was a AAA with 100 plus employees? Would it still fail? Helldivers, a game about politics, combined with a third-person shooter. Also, Helldivers is the game that I know least about. But what I do know is that Super Earth sounds pretty cool, except for bugs. Anyways, the game would go on to reach 500,000 concurrent players on Steam, with its multiplayer in groups, YouTubers, streamers, and its unique political story, only to then lose 90% of its players after only a few months. The decline was mainly due to PlayStation issues, along with server issues, repetitive gameplay, and unsatisfying updates. Today, the game is doing quite well, with a large group of dedicated players, along with newer updates for late game progression. Every game fades, from social games to AAA, due to several factors, but that's just the unfortunate new reality that we live in. People expect games to blow up and stay there for as long as possible to be considered successful, like Minecraft, Fortnite, and League of Legends. But that's just simply not true. The death of the game isn't a tragedy. It's a natural part of the experience. We play, we enjoy, and we move on. And that's okay. In the end, none of this matters. Everything will eventually die, and that's just part of life.